Hey everybody, what's up? It is Joel, aka The Daily Guru, and today for Music School I have something very special for you. We're on location at Masterdisk in Manhattan, and while a lot of people think they know what mastering is, we're going to get into the details on what it is and why it's so important. In its most basic term, for people who have no clue what mastering is, what is mastering?
The term mastering was coined to be the process and for the person that took a master recording and turned it into a master record. The term master is used to mean a gazillion different things in the process. You've got master takes, you've got master mixes, you've got master masters, you've got masters for mastering, you've got masters for iTunes, you've got masters for everything. The mastering step, though, is the final creative step in the process and the first sort of production or manufacturing step in the process. It's really where the two meet. It's an interesting combination of technology, of being needing to be very technical, addressing very, very minute technical details, and also communicating with the producer or the artist or the record label about their goals from a creative standpoint. What the goals or the outcome of mastering is usually expressed in terms of we want our project to sound finished. We want it to sound like a record. That's probably the most common euphemism for mastering.
So a lot of people seem to think, and I've heard this before, that they think it's similar to the mixing process in the studio. Where's the difference between mixing in the studio versus the mastering?
Well, this is really a common concern of late because a lot of people are mixing and mastering in the same environment. And I think they're really missing out on one of the key elements of mastering and why it's a different process. And that's the perspective. I've been quoted as saying mastering isn't a process, or at least it's much less of a process than it is a perspective. In the mixing studio, the engineers and the producer have heard the song all torn down into its individual pieces. They've listened to the top and the bottom mic on the snare drum, sometimes for hours, to decide. Sure. And so that's part of your subconscious. You almost can't remove yourself from that and become truly objective. When a client walks in with a master recording, it's the first time I'm hearing it. Mm-hmm. And albeit I know kind of what they probably want to achieve, but I'm reacting like the person who's heard it for the first time on the radio. I'm listening and reacting very similar to the way the fan would react. And I think that's a really positive, very, very effective tool to use that first reaction, the first instinct. So to that effect, when I first sat down with a project, once I've gotten a little bit of the understanding of what the producer is interested in doing, I will run through the project quite quickly and jot down on note sheets exactly what my first impressions are. Just without really wondering why or thinking why about the details. Like, okay, this feels like it needs this. This really, I hear that. I've heard this before. This reminds me of that. So I'm going to go to that. That's hard to describe what that is. Even when I'm sitting in the room with other engineers and they're watching my hands do this, I will often, when it's time to write it down on the note paper, go, that's kind of curious. Why did I cut 3K over here and boost 3K in a different shape over here? Because it sounded good and something led me to that conclusion. One of my criticisms of plugins is you tend to be interact with it in a very goal-oriented sort of way. It's not quite as fluid. You have to think, okay, I want 2 dB at 3K, because you have to dial in 3K and take it to 2 dB. Over here, the equipment, the analog master equipment is a little bit more of an extension of my experience, and I'll literally have a coffee cup or a phone, and I'm hearing, not so much a phone, but it was got other things, distraction, other people in the room, while other conversations go on, twist 2 or 3 different knobs, and then they go, well, what's that? And I take the EQ out, and I go, well, that's terrible. keep that EQ in. How did you know what was that? And I often answer, I don't know. That's just me channeling my experience through the equipment. But in almost any situation where you've got you're sliding parts around, you're tuning, vocals or other instruments, you're hearing that music in a different way. You're remembering, you're actually hearing the pieces that have been removed. But the listener never gets to hear it. They only hear what's actually coming out of the speakers. Sure. Your brain's different. And I really think that a project needs to really achieve everything that it can achieve. It needs that other brain. It needs that objective ear. And sometimes I describe mastering in terms of other media, like in terms of its visual counterpart. You might have a magazine design or a print media design, text and picture and all the compositions. But the final creative or the pre-press person needs to know how it's going to be printed, how it's going to be distributed, how many copies are going to be made, what kind of paper it's going to be on, whether it's going to be next to other things that are shiny, or whether you need to have an intimate knowledge of the end result of the production to make those final creative decisions that make it look as good and perform to its intended purpose in each one of those situations. And you get that just from experience. The corollaries, I think, are pretty straight. We could make something sound amazing in here, but it won't work well on earbuds or on a laptop playback, or it might not work good playback through a home theater, environment. But the fact is, I can't make it sound amazing in all of them.
Sure.
But the goal is for it to sound, effective, for the emotional effect to be achieved. And that's sometimes as little as microscopic EQ changes to, and other times completely almost rebalancing from stems. One of the more common factors in a mastering session is that the vocal level is right, and so you either have to print vocal up a half, vocal up a quarter, and vocal down. You have to print 6 or 7 different alternate mixes and bring them all as options. Or if you use separate stems, I tell you the options will really enslave you.
So then, in some ways, would it be okay for people to see mixing as getting each part right, and then when you master, you're getting the entirety right, kind of looking at it from the full?
Well, there's mastering for an individual song, which is more about making the most of that emotional element, or making the most of that commercial product, or trying to make it so that it communicates that vocal, everywhere. When you're talking about mixing for an album, they're not really that distinct. It's so much about the perspective. It's so much about my expectations or what the producer's expectations are. And then, quite frankly, sometimes producers come into the mastering session and are a little worried. It's that they've actually expressed that it feels kind of like final exam, or kind of like getting the report card for their project. I always joke that's why there's a couch in the mastering session. Sometimes they need to be consoled.
Sure.
Because quite often they don't know really what they've got a pretty good idea what it sounds like, but they don't really know what it sounds like until they've brought it here. I oftentimes hear people say, "We never heard that. I have no idea what that part that's in their mix and their production, or 2 pieces colliding, creating this other sound that they had never heard before on small speakers in their mix environment." Another thing you'll notice about most really quality mastering rooms is they're incredibly quiet.
Yeah.
All of the fans, all of the equipment that make noise have been isolated into other rooms. And so we don't have to play music particularly loud to be able to hear it in great detail. And that allows us to unveil, the noises and the, artifacts and problems that are on the mix.
You said that you prefer more of an analog approach to things than the digital approach.
From a mental standpoint, yes. From a sound quality standpoint, it really depends on the music. I do often use analog equipment over digital, but I tend to think that's also a function of my clientele. Come to me for that particular my work and the sound that I use. I can achieve very similar results with digital, and sometimes it's interesting to work it up in one and then try it in the other. And here, it's not always clear which one's going to win. You literally have to listen to both as options. The point that I made, though, wasn't certainly not that digital was inferior. It just, you kind of used a different part of your brain. You really have to focus on the little button on the screen. When, there are and have been digital versions of these consoles, which give you that same kind of feel.
Is there a discernible difference in the end product if you do the same piece analog versus digital?
Yeah, there'll be a discernible difference, and sometimes it's not the analog factor that you expect, which you might say, well, in my mind's ear, the analog is going to sound warmer. It's going to have maybe a little bit firmer bass, or maybe it's going to not be quite as crunchy up top. And I can make it really crunchy if you want it with analog gear. That's not a problem at all. I mean, digital can be made to be full and warm by using the appropriate settings and plugins. It's not very clear as to either or. Quite often at the time, the client's predisposed to one method or another. And we still do have a fair number of projects mixed to analog tape. So those are ones where it's really obvious that we want to stay in the analog domain kind of as long as possible.
A lot of people claim that now that we're into the age of heavy digital recording, that maybe mastering isn't necessary anymore, and you see a lot of albums that are going to market without mastering done to them.
Well, the streaming stuff, there's some bit of a logic to it. Actually, on a side, kind of thought that there might still be a point for that as a quality control step. There's still a mastering in an environment might really be valid, even if it's just a broadcast that isn't going to be recorded and replayed. Maybe someone really should put a quality quality set of ears and quality set of speakers to the environment. If the quality of the source is really, really compromised, if it really is a handheld device, from too far away, and it's really a lot of compromises in the recording, you would say that it wasn't really a whole lot that you can do.
Sure.
But there's almost always something that can be done to enhance the realism, enhance the reaction or the emotion of the listener. I think more than technology, it's become more of a patience and budgeting issue. People now feel like, well, we're giving this music away essentially, or maybe we're getting some other compensation for having people attracted to our website. So we're giving streaming music away, but there's some other financial incentives there. But we can't spend money on this music or spend more money on this music because this is all we're getting from it. My argument is always after 20 minutes in a mastering session, those people all change their mind. They really do, because they can't really experience that until they've sent their music to a really quality mastering facility. Quite reasonably, the $30 master your track while you over the internet kind of things aren't going to produce those kind of results. So that's helped fuel this feeling that we don't need mastering, because we've become kind of desensitized to what's good. Then there's the creative aspect of being sort of a contrarian, and we don't need no sneaking mastering kind of thing. That's sort of a different approach. Did a great sort of rendition, Shuggy Otis, a classic, a Strawberry Letter record. The Waka Bop reissued that record some time back, and it was gritty and funky and early beatbox stuff, and him just struggle. There's sort of like a struggle in that. We mastered that really carefully to maintain its integrity, and what we did sounded enormously better than what was and I think communicates that independent spirit. It doesn't have to be slick, it can be mastered to be really funky, and really retro in a similar sort of way. The control and the environment are really important, but boy, it's it's so more often the operation, the interpretation, the perspective, than it is really the technology. Bottom line, the goal is you don't want the listener to realize that there was any process involved in it at all. And this is one of my favorite quotes, is that the more perfectly I can do my job, the more invisible my process is to the public.